Good morning, afternoon, everyone. I want to talk to you today about something that weighs heavily on so many hearts: worry. Life has a way of throwing challenges at U.S. health concerns, financial struggles, family problems, uncertainties about the future. And in those moments, it's easy to feel like we're carrying the entire world on our shoulders. But here's the truth: God will handle it all. He sees what we cannot see. He knows what we do not know. And his wisdom far exceeds ours. The very same God who made the heavens and the earth is fully capable of taking care of the details of your life. You see, worry is often the result of forgetting who God is and focusing only on what we see. When we let anxiety rule our hearts, we're essentially saying, God, I don't think you can do this. But faith says, God, I trust you. And I believe that you are working all things together for my good. Believing God doesn't mean life will suddenly be free of problems. It means you stop carrying the weight of them alone. It means you surrender your fears and doubts, knowing that God is in control. So today, I want to encourage you, stop worrying. Release your burdens to the one who's able to handle them all. Your faith is more powerful than your fear. And when you trust God, peace will begin to replace anxiety. Remember, the same God who parted the Red Sea, fed thousands with a few loaves and fish, and raised the dead, is fully capable of taking care of your situation today. Believe it. Trust it. Rest in it. God will handle it all. Worry often begins quietly, almost unnoticed. It creeps into our minds in the form of small what-ifs, and gradually grows into heavy, suffocating anxiety. We worry about our finances, our health, our relationships, or the uncertainties of tomorrow. And when we find ourselves consumed by worry, it's easy to feel overwhelmed, powerless, and alone. But the truth is, worry is not just a natural response to life's challenges. It is often a sign that we have forgotten something crucial. We have forgotten the power and presence of God in our lives. When worry dominates our hearts, it reveals a subtle but dangerous truth. We have shifted our focus from the one who is all-powerful to the things that feel uncontrollable. The Bible tells us repeatedly not to be anxious. Philippians 4:6 says, do not be anxious about anything, but in every situation, by prayer and petition, with thanksgiving, present your requests to God. The very act of worry is the opposite of what God calls us to do. Worry is essentially a declaration that we do not believe that God is fully able to handle the situation before us. When we worry, we are saying, in effect, God, I see this problem, but I'm not sure you can fix it. I'm not sure you are watching over me. I'm not sure you care enough to intervene. That is the moment when our minds become the battlefield and fear begins to dominate. One of the reasons worry is so common is that we rely on what we can see rather than what God can do. We look at the obstacles, the bills, the illnesses, the uncertainties, and we let them overshadow the reality of God's power. It is easy to measure our circumstances against our own strength and find ourselves lacking. But God's strength is not measured by what we see. His power is limitless, eternal, and active in ways we cannot comprehend. Forgetting this truth leaves us vulnerable to worry because we believe the weight of life rests solely on our shoulders. Consider how often God's people in the Bible faced impossible situations. Noah building an ark before it ever rained Moses, confronting Pharaoh with nothing but a staff and God's promise, David standing before Goliath armed only with faith. Each of these individuals faced circumstances that could have easily led to overwhelming fear and worry. Yet, what set them apart was that they remembered the power of God. They did not rely solely on their own strength, and they did not allow their hearts to be consumed by anxiety. Their focus was on the one who had the power to turn impossibility in victory. For us, forgetting God's power can happen gradually. It begins with the small, quiet doubts. Can God really provide for me? Will he really heal my situation? Can he really protect my family? And as these doubts grow, worry takes root and begins to control our thoughts. When worry dominates, it often manifests in sleepless nights, constant overthinking, and a restless heart. It distracts us from prayer, from gratitude, and from seeing God at work in our lives. Worry is a signal, a red flag, telling us that our faith has shifted from God to ourselves, to circumstances that we cannot control. The antidote is simple, though not always easy. We must intentionally remember God's power. We must remind ourselves that He is the creator of the universe, the one who spoke light into darkness, the one who commands the wind and the waves. If He is able to create galaxies, to form life from dust, to guide the course of nations, He is more than able to handle the challenges we face today. Remembering His power recalibrates our perspective. It shifts our focus from the problem to the problem solver. It moves us from fear to faith, from anxiety to peace. Prayer, scripture meditation, and thanksgiving are practical ways to combat worry and remember God's power. When worry threatens to take over, we can speak God's promises aloud, reminding ourselves that nothing is too difficult for Him. We can recount His faithfulness in the past and recognize that the God who has never failed us is still at work. Each time we intentionally recall His strength and sovereignty, worry loses its grip. Our hearts begin to trust again, and our minds rest in the assurance that we do not carry the burden alone. Ultimately, worry is not just a challenge. It is a spiritual indicator. It signals that we are relying on our own understanding rather than God's limitless power. But every time we stop, remember who God is, and turn our hearts back to Him, we resist worry and embrace faith. The shift begins in our minds and hearts as we acknowledge that the God who holds the universe also holds our life. Worry has no place where faith trusts in God's power, because no situation is beyond His control and no burden is too heavy for Him to carry. Life often feels overwhelming because we are limited in what we can perceive. We see the problems right in front of us, the deadlines we cannot meet, bills we cannot pay, the relationships that seem broken beyond repair. We measure situations by what our eyes tell us, and often that is not enough. We are finite, limited by time, knowledge, understanding, but God is infinite. His vision is not limited. He sees what we cannot see. He perceives every detail of our lives, every twist and turn of circumstance, every hidden motive of those around us, and every potential outcome. When we forget this truth, we live in fear, worry, and anxiety, reacting only to what is visible instead of trusting in the one who sees the whole picture. The psalmist reminds us in Psalm 139 that God knows us completely. You know when I sit and when I rise. You perceive my thoughts from afar. God's vision is not hinde, read by distance, time, or complexity. He sees not only our present circumstances, but also the future that we cannot grasp. This means that while we may panic over what is happening today, God already sees the outcome and is at work behind the scenes, orchestrating every detail for His purposes and our good. When we understand that God sees what we cannot, worry begins to lose its grip. Our limited perspective may convince us that everything is falling apart, but God's all-seeing eye knows the complete story. Consider Joseph in the Bible, sold into slavery by his own brothers, falsely accused and thrown into prison. Joseph could see only suffering and betrayal. From his perspective, everything looked hopeless. Yet God saw what Joseph could not see. God saw the eventual elevation of Joseph to the position of second in command in Egypt, the opportunity to save nations from famine, and the fulfillment of His larger plan. Joseph's trials were part of a bigger picture that only God could perceive. When we grasp that God sees what we cannot, we can trust even when life seems unfair, confusing, or painful. We learn to rest in the assurance that nothing is random. And every setback may be setting us up for a greater purpose. Our inability to see the future often fuels worry. We ask ourselves questions like, what if I fail? What if my loved one does not recover? What if I never achieve my dreams? These are natural thoughts, but they are born from focusing only on what is visible. God, however, has knowledge beyond what we can understand. He knows the opportunities, the resources, the timing, and the divine connections that we are blind to. He can take what seems like loss or delay and turn it into blessing. He can take what seems like defeat and turn it into victory. Understanding that God sees what we cannot shifts our perspective from panic to peace, from anxiety to trust. Faith is learning to trust in the unseen. Hebrews 11 tells us that faith is the assurance of things hoped for, the conviction of things not seen. Worry is the opposite. It focuses on what is seen and fears what is unknown. But when we trust that God sees what we cannot, we begin to live differently. We begin to approach challenges with confidence instead of fear, knowing that God's understanding surpasses ours. We can surrender our anxieties because we realize that He is already at work, arranging the pieces of our lives in ways we cannot yet comprehend. Even in everyday matters, this principle holds true. We may worry about a financial shortfall, but God sees the provision we have not yet encountered. We may fret over relationships that feel strained, but God sees hearts that are being changed and reconciled. We may fear the future of our careers, families, or health, but God sees the unseen doors that will open at the right time. His omniscience allows Him to guide us with perfect wisdom, even when we feel lost or uncertain. Recognizing that God sees what we cannot see invites peace into our hearts. It allows us to stop struggling against life as if we are the only ones holding the pieces together. We no longer have to carry every burden alone or try to solve every problem with our limited understanding. Instead, we can lift our eyes to the one who knows all, sees all, and works all things together for good. This awareness transforms worry into worship, anxiety into trust, and fear into faith. When life feels uncertain, we can rest in the truth that God's sight is not limited by time, space, or circumstance. He sees what we cannot, and He is working it all for our ultimate good. Fear is one of the most powerful emotions we face as human beings. It creeps into our minds like a shadow, often without warning, and it can grip our hearts so tightly that it paralyzes us from taking action. Fear comes in many forms. Fear of failure, fear of the future, fear of loss, fear of rejection, fear of the unknown. Whispers lies that make us doubt our worth, our ability, and even God's goodness. Yet God has provided a solution to fear that is far greater than the fear itself. Faith. Faith is not wishful thinking or blind optimism. Faith is trusting in God's promises, relying on His character, believing in His power, even when circumstances suggest otherwise. Faith replaces fear because it shifts our focus from what is seen and uncertain to what is certain and eternal. When fear arises, it is usually because we are looking at the problem instead of the problem solver. We focus on the storm rather than the one who calms it. We concentrate on the size of the mountain rather than the power of the God who can move it. Fear tells us, you are alone in this. While faith responds, God is with me, and He is greater than any challenge I face. Faith does not ignore reality. It acknowledges the challenge, but refuses to be controlled by it. It is the confidence that God is bigger than any fear, stronger than any obstacle, and wiser than any plan we could devise. The Bible repeatedly encourages us to choose faith over fear. In 2 Timothy 1:10, we are reminded, for God has not given us a spirit of fear, but of power and of love and of a sound mind. Fear is not from God. It is a lie that seeks to make us doubt his promises and question his care. God has given us the ability to respond with power, love, and clarity of thought when fear threatens to overtake us. Faith is the expression of that divine gift. When we place our trust in him, fear loses its authority over us. Fear may knock at the door of our minds, but faith can refuse to answer. Faith is often demonstrated most clearly in the face of trials. When the Israelites faced the Red Sea with Pharaoh's army behind them, fear would have been the natural response. They saw the impossible, a wall of water in front of them and soldiers closing in behind. But faith allowed Moses and the people to trust in God's power and follow his instruction. Faith replaced fear. And what seemed like an impossible situation became the stage for God's miraculous deliverance. Similarly, in our own lives, faith allows us to respond to challenges not with panic, but with trust. It enables us to take steps forward even when we cannot see the entire path. Faith also grows when we remember God's past faithfulness, reflecting on how God has delivered, provided, and protected in the past. Reminds our hearts of his unchanging nature. Fear diminishes when we recall times when God has been our refuge, our provider, our defender. Each answered prayer, each obstacle overcome, and each moment of guidance strengthened. Our ability to respond to new challenges with faith rather than fear, by intention. Ally recalling God's faithfulness, we reinforce the truth that he is trustworthy, capable, and always present. Practical steps also help faith replace fear. Prayer is a powerful tool, allowing us to cast our anxieties on God and seek his guidance. Meditating on scripture fills our minds with promises that anchor us in truth, reminding us that God is in control. Surrounding ourselves with fellow believers encourages us to trust. Collectively, drawing strength from shared testimony and support. Each of these steps shifts our focus from the problem to the one who can solve it. Faith is strengthened, and fear gradually loses its power. Faith does not eliminate the presence of challenges, but it transforms the way we face them. Fear shrinks in the light of God's promises, and what once seemed overwhelming begins to feel manageable. Faith reminds us that we are not alone, that God is working behind the scenes, and that his plans for us are perfect, even when life appears chaotic. Fear tells us we cannot. But faith declares that with God, all things are possible. Fear focuses on the immediate danger. Faith sees the eternal outcome. Fear narrows our vision. Faith expands it to include God's perspective. Ultimately, faith replaces fear because it changes the foundation of our trust. When we place our confidence in God, we are no longer dependent on our own understanding, strength, or timing. Fear may attempt to dictate our decisions, but faith allows us to move forward with courage, knowing that God is greater than every obstacle. Faith is not passive. It is active trust that takes steps even in uncertainty, knowing that God's power, wisdom, and love are sufficient for every challenge. In a world full of uncertainty, faith becomes our anchor, our defense, and our source of peace, gradually displacing fear with trust and hope in the one who holds all things in his hands. Belief is not a magic wand that removes problems from our lives. Too often, people think that faith or trust in God will make life smooth, easy, and free of difficulty. But the reality is that challenges are a part of life. Even the strongest believers face trials, obstacles, and disappointments. Belief does not mean the absence of storms. It means learning to navigate the storms with the confidence that God is present, capable, and faithful. When we truly believe in God, our faith becomes a source of strength, a shield that protects our heart from despair, and a foundation that keeps us standing when everything around us seems to crumble. Belief changes the way we experience challenges. It does not always change the challenges themselves. Many people misunderstand faith because they expect belief to eliminate difficulty. They pray, they trust, they believe, and yet life continues to present obstacles. A sudden illness, a financial setback, a broken relationship, these challenges do not disappear simply because we believe. Belief is not about escaping life's realities. It is about engaging. Need them with a perspective anchored in God's promises and character. When we believe in God, we are strengthened to endure, to persevere, and to respond with courage rather than fear. Faith equips us to face the difficulties that are inevitable in life without being overwhelmed by them. The Bible gives countless examples of believers who faced enormous challenges yet were strengthened by their faith. Job lost his family, his health, and his wealth, yet he clung to God in the midst of unimaginable suffering. Paul endured shipwrecks, imprisonments, beatings, and countless hardships, yet he testified that he could do all things through Christ who strengthened him. Their belief did not remove their problems, but it strengthened them to endure, to grow, and to glorify God even in the middle of trials. Belief gives us perspective. It reminds us that while the circumstances may be difficult, God is bigger than any problem, and his power is at work, even when we cannot see it. Belief strengthens us because it shifts our focus from what we cannot control to the one who is in control. When we believe, we acknowledge that our understanding is limited, but God's is infinite. Our vision is short-sighted, but God's sees the beginning, the end, and every detail in between. Challenges may appear insurmountable, but believing in God reminds us that he has a plan that we may not yet understand. Strength comes when we surrender our need to control every outcome and place our confidence in God as sovereignty. Belief allows us to respond to difficulties with wisdom, patience, and perseverance rather than panic and frustration. Belief also strengthens us by building our character and resilience. Challenges are not just obstacles, they're opportunities for growth. Every trial, every setback, every moment of difficulty is a chance to exercise faith, to trust God more deeply, and to rely on his strength rather than our own. Romans 5:3-4 tells us that suffering produces perseverance, character, and hope. When we believe, we are strengthened not only to endure, but to be refined by the process. Belief turns trials into training grounds, shaping our hearts, minds, and spirits for greater faithfulness, wisdom, and maturity. Furthermore, belief strengthens us by providing peace amid uncertainty. When we trust that God is in control, we no longer have to be consumed by worry, fear, or doubt. We can face difficult circumstances with a sense of calm, knowing that God is working on our behalf. Belief does not always change the external situation, but it changes our internal experience. We gain the strength to maintain hope, to continue moving forward, and to make wise decisions even when the outcome is not immediately visible. Our faith becomes a source of stability, enabling us to stand firm when life feels chaotic or unpredictable. Belief also strengthens us through community and encouragement. When we openly trust in God, others are inspired by our faith, and we are supported by the prayers and fellowship of those around us. God often strengthens us through the presence, encouragement, and wisdom of others who remind us of his faithfulness and provision. Strength is not only found within ourselves, but also in the shared faith of God as people, reinforcing our trust and perseverance in difficult times. Ultimately, believing strengthens us because it reminds us that God is bigger than our problem. Challenges may persist, difficulties may arise, and storms may rage, but belief gives us the courage, endurance, and perspective to face them with confidence. Faith is not about avoiding the storms of life. It is about standing firm in the midst of them, knowing that God is with us, guiding us, and empowering us every step of the way. Belief does not remove challenges, but it transforms the way we experience them, strengthening us to grow, endure, and emerge victorious through the power of God. It is easy to feel invisible or forgotten when life becomes difficult. Problems pile up, plans fall apart, and it seems as if no one is paying attention to our struggles. In those moments, our hearts may whisper, God, are you even here? Do you see what I am going through? The truth is, God is always active in your life. Even when circumstances suggest otherwise, He is at work behind the scenes, orchestrating events, guiding paths, and working all things together for your good. His activity may not always be visible or immediate, but it is constant, intentional, and purposeful. Understanding that God is actively involved in our lives changes the way we respond to challenges, uncertainty, and pain. God's activity in our lives is often subtle. He works through circumstances, through relationships, through provision, and even through delays. Sometimes what appears to be a setback is actually a setup orchestrated by God to bring about something greater. When Joseph was sold into slavery, he could not see God's plan. Yet God was actively shaping his life to prepare him to save nations from famine. When David faced Goliath, the battle seemed impossible, but God was active, empowering him, equipping him with courage, skill, and faith. The fact that God is active does not always mean the path will be easy, but it does mean that no situation is beyond His control, and nothing is wasted in His plan. Recognizing God's activity requires a shift in perspective. We often look at our problems and measure our lives by what is visible to the human eye. We see bills, failures, broken relationships, and disappointments, and we assume that God is inactive. But the truth is that God is constantly moving in ways we cannot perceive. He arranges opportunities, opens doors, redirects paths, and places people in our lives to guide, encourage, and support us. Sometimes His work is dramatic and obvious. Other times it is quiet and imperceptible. Either way, God is always at work. And His activity in our lives is intentional and precise. Faith is necessary to see God's activity in action. Many times, people miss God's intervention because they are looking for dramatic signs rather than trusting that He is working quietly behind the scenes. When we believe that God is active, we can recognize His fingerprints in the seemingly ordinary events of life. A timely word of encouragement, an unexpected opportunity, a door that closes to prevent harm, or a relationship that develops to provide guidance. These are evidence of God's involvement. Belief allows us to discern His hand at work even when circumstances are